Good morning. Ooh. Just rechecking my videos just in case. Alrighty. We few but mighty today. Welcome to everyone who is here both on Zoom and in person. I am just checking folks off to give y'all credit for being here. Reminder that exam 3 is due today. So folks in class, I'll collect it from you at the end of class. Folks who are on Zoom, you can shove it under my door at any point today. And if something's going on where you need to turn it in late, just shoot me an email and let me know what's going on. Just checking folks off here. Alrighty. And got some chats. Let me see. Okay. Some people already sent me emails. Cool. I have not had a chance to check it this morning. So I will try to check it during my lunch break right after this. So I will scope those out, try to get back to y'all. Just a reminder, I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Yeah. Well, just a reminder of everything coming up, because we're going to be at the end of the semester before we even realize it, which is a little overwhelming for me. I don't know. It's probably more overwhelming for y'all, I'm guessing. But just to get us all on the same page here, go ahead and share this. So if we scroll down, and I just realized my projector's not on for my folks in class, so that's not going to help them see it. There we go. It'll take just a sec to warm up. But if you have the hard copy of your syllabus, we are looking at page 10, the very last page. So while this is pulling up, you can look at it there as well. Or if you have your computer open, you can follow along. It's very slowly warming up. Alrighty. So if you haven't already turned in the outline for your poster, that was due about a week ago. So make sure you get that in. I've been really trying hard to keep up with exam grading, and so I haven't been as good at looking at other grading. Friday I should have some time to sit and do that. So hopefully I'll catch up for those of you who have turned in your outlines. But if you haven't, please get that in so that I can give you feedback, let you know where you might want to expand more information, etc. People who did turn that in a while ago might already have it graded by me from one of the days I was able to sit and grade. And so Your actual poster is due on the 1st, and this is just so that you have it done and ready for our presentations on the 8th. And so we are going to be still continuing to cover understanding social behavior this week. We have an activity we'll probably get you on Friday rather than today. And then next week we'll cover everyday living, going on into that first day of Thanksgiving week. And then we are going to think about just sort of reflecting on the class as a whole. The other thing to remember is to keep up with your perusals. At midterm, there were a few people who hadn't done any of the perusals, and that was really pulling your grades down. You can still get them all in and, you know, have your grade be fine by the end of the semester. If you're having any difficulty accessing perusal, let me know, and I can get you in touch with their tech support, because there's only so much I can do. But if it's a financial issue, let me know, because we can probably work something out. Any questions about everything that's coming up? All right. So let me go back to where we were. I was just testing some of my videos this morning. So go ahead and get to my Zoom setting, hide our captions, and then get us into our slideshow here. And I'm just going to take a quick sec and check in the people who have just been signing in online and in person. So give me a second here. All right. And again, just a reminder for folks who are online today that your exam is due today. So make sure that you get that to me ideally by end of day. If I'm not in my office, I do teach a lot today. Then you can just slide it under my office door, and then I'll get it the next time I'm back in my office. All righty. So we've been talking about why people do stupid stuff, basically, right? Why do your friends sit and, you know, say weird things or do things that you're like, why are you engaging in that behavior, right? And so there's a lot of psychological explanations as to why people do what they do and say what they say. And one of them is cognitive dissonance. And I think cognitive dissonance has been sort of appropriated by our culture and used, that sounds weird, like it's a racial thing. Sorry. It's basically been like used out of context in a pop culture way. That's a much better way to say it. Is everyone will be like, oh, I have cognitive dissonance about that, but I don't think they know what the term means, right? But basically what it is if you have some personal beliefs and then you're shown evidence that's contrary to that, then that can make you feel a lot of anxiety that you might resolve in good ways, or you might resolve in really not healthy ways. So it's this anxiety produced by an inconsistency between your personal beliefs, behaviors, or attitudes, right? So let's say you've always believed, I don't know, I'm gonna come up with something really silly. I don't know. Squirrels are a member of the cat species. This is the most ridiculous example I've ever come up with, but that's okay. And then you find out, someone's like, what are you talking about? They're cats, they're rodents, right? You might be like, no, right? And like really do like mental backflips to try and justify that squirrels are cats, right? This is a weird example, but it works in its own way. So you can imagine people doing that for like a religious point of view, a political point of view, right? Deeply held personal beliefs about something, that when those are questioned, or another good example is, let's say there's someone you idolize, be they a movie star, a politician, you know, a scientist, what have you, and then you find out that they're actually a terrible person, right? this happened to me. One of the seminal writers in feminist theory in general, but specifically about the body, so very intertwined with my research, is Naomi Wolf. And so I've always had my students read her work and talked about her and cited her. Well, it turns out she's a big anti-vaxxer and espouses a lot of really non-scientific ideas that are really harmful. Right. So to be but she's a classic writer, right? But how am I not gonna have people read her? Was a struggle for me, right? And there are certainly people who justify it. Probably a better, more well-known example is J.K. Rowling, right? There are a lot of folks who love Harry Potter so much, and I'm not judging that at all, right? It's a great fandom. A lot of people really identify with it. I'm a Ravenclaw, right? I know this. I grew up with this, right, when I was in college and grad school. But a lot of people aren't acknowledging the fact that the things she is saying are actively harmful, not only to trans individuals, but also to women in some ways now too. And it's very strange and very hard for them when it's been so much a part of your identity, right? So I have a couple videos to give probably much better examples than I did about cognitive dissonance.
In the 1950s, a cult in the US believed the world would be destroyed by a flood on December 21st, 1954. Many of its members were so convinced that they left their jobs and gave away all their possessions. And then came December 22nd. As you can imagine, the group felt, a gnawing sense of discomfort, but they also contributed a lot to the field of psychology. See, 3 social psychologists had infiltrated this group, and one of them, named Leon Festinger, gave a name to the group's inner conflict. He called it cognitive dissonance, and it's now a huge area of research. You have probably even experienced it before.
And so just a side note, Festinger was one of the most, and still is, as far as I know, he's still unproblematic except for this lying to the cult part, but a lot of people did this to study things back then. But he came up with a lot of the theories we still use today. So for example, ideas about why we compare ourselves to other people, and why that's beneficial, things along those lines. So he was also on the ground, literally doing this research, right?
Before. But cognitive dissonance isn't always a bad thing. In fact, it can be a major way we grow, at least if you know how to spot it. Cognitive dissonance is a state of uneasiness that happens when you have inconsistent beliefs or behaviors. You may have felt it when you learned new information about the world that contradicted something you'd believed for a long time, or maybe you learned something about your behavior that conflicted with your sense of self. For example, someone might experience cognitive dissonance if they believe they're not a prejudiced person, but after a psychological test, they realize they have a lot of implicit biases. This discomfort can come up in all kinds of scenarios, though, and we can even see it in the brain, notably in the region that monitors errors in your thoughts and actions, the one involved in rationalizing and cognitive control, and one likely involved in emotions, especially anger and disgust. Of course, knowing how our brains respond to this stress doesn't make these feelings any easier, and it also doesn't make it easier to admit we're wrong. Instead, how hard it is to change your mind about something depends on what psychologists call your resistance to change. And that trait depends on a few factors, such as how much you identify with your belief, how much satisfaction you get from your behavior, and how much pain or loss you'd have to endure to change those things. For example, let's say you see yourself as an advocate for the environment, but then you learn that the company you work for makes evil villain levels of pollution and refuses to change. If you don't like the job and you have another opportunity, you'd probably just leave. Your resistance to changing your behavior would be pretty low. But if you've been working there for years and are really invested in the company and the community and culture there, quitting would be harder because you'd experience more loss, so your resistance to change would be much higher. One way around this would be to change your belief, to decide that maybe you're not that much of an environmental advocate after all. But if that's not an option, your brain might try other strategies to reduce your uneasiness. For instance, you might try to rationalize your thinking or behavior by finding positive things about your company, or you might think of things that are even worse and make your company seem lovely by comparison. Like you might remind yourself that your company creates jobs and a better quality of life for some people. Or you might read stories about other companies that dump toxic waste directly into people's mouths and think, well, your company at least isn't doing that, so they're fairly green by comparison. Then you can keep thinking of yourself as an advocate with a clean conscience. This is just an example, of course. Cognitive dissonance can apply to all kinds of ways we interact with the world, and there are also plenty of other ways we tend to react to it. Like we might try and protect ourselves from discomfort by engaging in selective exposure. That's where someone only listens to people and media sources that agree with them, and they dismiss other voices that challenge their worldview. Studies suggest that we might also do this internally. We skew our memories to reduce the feeling that our thoughts are inconsistent. For example, in a 2014 paper, 121 students who didn't want their tuition to increase were asked to write an essay supporting higher tuition. Afterward, they became more in favor of tuition increases, but they also misremembered themselves as being okay with higher tuition in the first place. And finally, there's the most simple thing. When faced with evidence that we might be wrong, our brains can just completely ignore whatever's making us uncomfortable. The point is, we really don't like feeling inconsistent, and consciously or not, we'll go a long way to reduce the feeling that our thoughts or actions don't line up with the way we see ourselves or the world. Still, cognitive dissonance isn't always bad. There are fewer studies about this, but it seems like this discomfort can also help us grow and make better decisions, like by leaving an unhealthy job or identifying biased beliefs. So, what can you do about your brain's clever schemes to reduce it? Well, psychologists recommend you pay attention to your initial response to new information and remind yourself you're probably more biased than you want to think. Then you can make a deliberate effort to question your response and analyze it. And also, it doesn't hurt to do some research to make sure your beliefs and actions are based on evidence and not on the tricky games your brain is playing to ease your inner conflict. Because in some cases, the first step to defeating your own brain is knowing what it's up to. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych. This channel.
And so, yeah, our brains could just kind of like blank on or reject information that's novel or that draws into question things we truly believe. So I'll give you all an example. Last year, I was invited to be a guest speaker in Dr. Minnis's FYE class over in communication. And they were talking about flashbulb memories. I think we have talked about this in passing in here. But a flashbulb memory is when there's a giant event so traumatic that like there's a collective remembrance of it, right? And the flashbulb memory comes where you remember where you were, what you were doing when you heard about it. I learned about these in undergrad. I'm not a cognitive psychologist, so I hadn't really brushed up on it since then. So I actually learned in preparing for Dr. Minnis's class that recent research has shown these are horrifically inaccurate. That people will remember things from a week later and say that they were part of their flashbulb memory for that day. They will just confabulate things, which is like unintentionally making stuff up. And I looked at it and I told his class this. I was like, yeah, I just learned this, right? And it's telling me my memory's wrong, but I remember September 11th so clearly. I can't be wrong about that, right? Of course I am, right? And there's no one around to like verify. I guess I could contact my suite mates from undergrad and see what they remember of that day, right? But even as a scientist who knowingly always questions and is always willing to engage with this, when it's something that like matters to me, right? This flashbulb memory is something I've held, I've retold in countless classes. And that's part of the problem, right? Anytime you repeat a memory, it's like a fish story, right? It gets more elaborate, more big, right? And so, in fact, it's probably inaccurate, at least a little bit, if not wildly inaccurate. But, you know, to this day, I'm like, but I remember I walked into my room and I looked at my screen and a friend of mine had used AOL Instant Messenger to really date me, to say that a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center, and I thought, what a horrible mistake. Like, that was the first thing I thought. And I could remember a lot of things that happened that day, but who knows if they actually happened that day, right? So it's sort of interesting to think about even these things that we thought were sort of like, it was called a flashbulb memory because the idea was like, it takes this moment of time and it's like more accurate than other times, right? You remember it more clearly, you think, but it doesn't mean it's more accurate. And that, knowing what we know about human memory in general, right, that should not surprise us. But again, like, I'm still like, no, I remember. Probably don't. And so I always like to share when even I have some, fallacies I need to try to overcome. For your generation, I don't really know if you have a flashbulb point, and I hope that you don't, right? So for my parents' generation, it was, Kennedy being shot and assassinated. For, I think some people my generation, but particularly Gen X, have it for when the Challenger exploded, the space shuttle, because a lot of people were watching it on TV because there was a teacher who was going to space. So a lot of people have it for that. Some people your generation have it for Sandy Hook. And then like, I've actually, some folks I've talked to have it for like the beginning of the pandemic. So like, I can remember very clearly the events of the day before spring break 2020, right? Because we had like a faculty meeting. And part of why I remember this, and it's really interesting because I think social media might change some of this, right? Is I posted Instagram pictures that day. I went to BJ's to pick up supplies and there was no toilet paper. So I took a picture of the shelf and I was like, what is this, right? And I like had lunch at home with my cat and was like, well, I guess I'm gonna be doing this a lot, in the coming weeks. But it's so interesting to think about like, how will having documented these things and like having an easy, like your memories pop up every year, right, affect what our memories, because also we tend to put like the good stuff, right, on social media, or the like really weird stuff that we can all commiserate about, like again, all the toilet paper being gone and the whole stuff. Very bizarre, right? So again, just sort of interesting things to think about. And again, even those of us with PhDs are not immune. And in fact, I saw a great tweet yesterday that said, people with PhDs aren't smarter, they just work a lot harder. And then someone had replied and said, yes, it's this, but also spite. Like, I just like get a log on spite. And I was like, yup, I feel that some days. Not against y'all, but against other folks in the administration, the field, etc.
We all know that smoking is bad for us. This is a message that has drilled.
So this is another one about, some other examples of cognitive dissonance. I think for a term like this, again, that's been sort of misused or overused in the common vernacular, it's really helpful to take some time to pause and actually look at good examples of it.
Drilled in our minds from the moment we enter elementary school. Cigarettes are bad. They'll kill you. They'll give you lung cancer. You know all these messages just as well as I do. So why is it that over 30 million American adults still smoke? Why is vaping, a trend that still involves ingesting nicotine, still a trend in the first place? Why have we not completely eliminated smoking? Part of the answer is that nicotine is so addictive that it takes hold of people who smoke. Quitting isn't easy, although it can be done. But we would be remiss to neglect the psychological processes that happen whenever someone picks up a cigarette, especially when they know that it's bad for them. Sure, some smokers pick up cigarettes or Juuls with the intention of hurting themselves, but most people do not. They face a crossroads known as cognitive dissonance. The discomfort of being at this crossroads often pushes the smoker to keep smoking. So cognitive dissonance does not just occur when you're lighting up a cigarette. We experience cognitive dissonance as we read the news, whenever we drive a car, or force ourselves to go to sleep at night. And in this video, I'm going to talk about what cognitive dissonance is and how it influences the mind. The more you understand this process, the easier it will be to make well-informed decisions down the road. And that might mean putting down the cigarette. So first of all, what is cognitive?
So just like a quick pause here, to talk a little bit about the science related to vaping. So it's interesting because in some ways it seems like it might be a little better, but we don't have long-term research, so we don't know for sure. But we certainly know there are some worse things about vaping as opposed to smoking, including there's some evidence that people are inhaling like heavy metals from the vape itself. So that's not good. That's never good, right? And so we have to always be cautious when there's something new and we don't have long-term research about it to just be like, this is better. Because honestly, even right now, we don't know.
Dissonance. In 1957, Leon Festinger published A Theory of Cognitive Dissonance,
He's there
and
again.
it defined the term as a state of mental discomfort that arises from holding two different beliefs or values. This discomfort may also come about if we're pressured to act in a way that goes against our belief system. The mind likes simple things. It also likes consistencies. And if you hold two opposing beliefs, such as I want to stay alive for a long time and I want to smoke a cigarette, the mind is not going to feel so comfortable. So what does the mind do?
So really interestingly, just thinking about the application in psychology, there are whole therapies now based on the idea that you can hold two different beliefs, that they can both be accurate. So for example, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a treatment for borderline personality disorder and other folks who engage in non-suicidal self-harm. They talk about like you can hold two beliefs at once and they can both be true. So like clients can be trying as hard as they can in the moment to get better, but that doesn't mean they can't try harder, right? And those therapies have been very effective for the things they were created for. I'm saying that caveat because someone recently, I want to say in the UK, tried to use dialectical behavioral therapy, which is one of the most intensive therapies we have, to just like do a random intervention on teens who were not diagnosed with anything. And like, it didn't work. And it actually was harmful in some cases. And it's like, well, yeah, just like if someone didn't have high blood pressure and you started pumping blood pressure meds into them, right? It's potentially harmful. So again, doesn't mean therapy is always perfect.
It attempts to minimize the discomfort in any way that it can. So here lies the most important point that Festinger made in his book. Minimizing discomfort in the mind can be a great motivator. At the time, this idea was quite new, but it's proved to be an interesting explanation for many of the decisions that we make every day. Now, I want to go into a little bit of some examples of cognitive dissonance. The first one is cigarette smoking, obviously. Festinger used the example of cigarette smoking to show just how powerful cognitive dissonance is. Again, we all know that smoking is bad for us, yet people who are addicted to nicotine still want to smoke or use their Juul. Festinger suggested that when smokers encounter cognitive dissonance, they will reason with themselves to minimize this discomfort. They will tell themselves that maybe smoking isn't actually that bad, or they'll say that they're not smoking enough to cause any real damage. They may also tell themselves that smoking is better than other bad habits, or that quitting will lead to other bad habits like overeating or alcohol abuse. These are all just explanations that they justify smoking with. And to a non-smoker, these justifications don't exactly add up. They certainly do not negate the fact that smoking is bad for you. But these are things that someone will tell themselves to get rid of cognitive dissonance. Another example is fake news. Now, we currently live in a very polarized political climate. People feel that they have to be on one side. The other side is full of lying and cheating buffoons. Cognitive dissonance plays a part in this polarization. Cries of fake news is a common way to deal with cognitive dissonance. Failing to research the current pandemic, yet calling it a conspiracy, is one way to minimize the discomfort of knowing that going out and partying could cost you your life, or others theirs. Sure, there are a lot of false stories circulating on this information, but simply writing it off as fake news, just because it goes against your current views and what you want to do, is a result of minimizing cognitive dissonance. Another example is peer pressure. Now, this concept may
So
also
again, as we talked about earlier in the semester, there is plenty of fake news out there, right? Particularly on social media. But there is, from again, all sides of the political spectrum, this knee-jerk tendency to call anything you don't agree with fake news, right? And that's different than like a bot actually trying to create fake news, right?
also explain why people stay in relationships, stay in organizations, or jobs that are not in their best interest. Peer pressure can create a strong sense of cognitive dissonance. It's easier to go with the crowd sometimes, especially if that crowd is a cult. Studies have shown that this is true. In one study, a group of people were told to answer a question about whether two lines were the same length or if they were different. Everyone in the group, including actors in the study, gave a blatantly wrong answer. 75% of the time, the participant they were observing did the same, to seemingly just go along with the group. Now moving
So that's the Ash conformity study. If people are like, wait, which study was that? I think I remember that from intro study. That's the Ash conformity study.
on, cognitive dissonance is powerful, which is exactly why you need to know about it. With this information, you can be more aware about how you are making decisions and whether or not you're letting this discomfort get the best of you. Now, discomfort is inevitable if you're learning new information, hearing the opinions of others, or making difficult decisions. It's just going to happen. But now that you're aware of what cognitive dissonance is, you can be on the lookout for it. Now, this may require practicing mindfulness to build up some kind of awareness of your thoughts and feelings. The more in tune that you are with your body and your mind and your thoughts, the easier it will be to spot discomfort. If you know the source of this discomfort, you'll be less likely to be swayed by it. I suggest allowing yourself to feel uncomfortable when someone challenges your viewpoints. Take the time to actually research claims that you see online, rather than just brushing them off as fake news. Step back from decisions that you might make due to peer pressure. Cognitive dissonance aims to keep things simple, but it can put you in a real mess of a situation if you end up making the wrong decision. I want to thank you for watching this video on cognitive dissonance.
Alrighty. So again, some examples,
We
give you a little bit better view of what dissonance is psychologically versus like how the term is thrown around in pop culture. So it's closely related to hypocrisy. And hypocrisy involves giving the appearance of believing something we really do not. And scientists have made use of hypocrisy as a way of highlighting discrepancies between individual attitudes or beliefs and behavior, such as the health behaviors that we just saw related to smoking or exercise, right? We all know that exercise is good for our not only physical health, but mental health, right? In a lot of cases. I don't know if anyone saw the meme that went around, I think this summer, where it was like this guy just like, and I think a lot of people did it, but the guy I remember had like those walking poles. He was like, I'm taking my stupid walk for my stupid mental health, right? But at least for me personally, I know that I do feel better mentally when I do work out, right? And other people feel the same way, although it's, again, not a cure in and of itself. Researchers might ask you to make public statements or prepare an essay on the importance of exercise, to highlight the inconsistency between your belief and behavior, and the hope is that it would prompt you to change. And so being forced into a hypocritical act can motivate us to eliminate cognitive dissonance. And I wanted to, there's not a lot of great videos about this, which is why I hadn't put this in before, but I found one video while we were watching the other videos that I was like, oh, I should have something about this. There are now whole therapies based on cognitive dissonance and prevention programs based on cognitive dissonance. And so this is just a really short one about how this is being used in an intervention for eating disorders.
Sudden cardiac death is one of the leading causes of death for women who have diagnosable eating disorders.
This is someone with a severe eating disorder where they have their R wave, which is right here, right here, right here, and right here, and their average is about 0.72.
There's a certain marker that is very present in women with diagnosable eating disorders.
Professor of Psychology Melinda Green hasn't missed a beat on her research about the heart's relationship to eating disorders, for 15 years.
Now we're trying to find out what shifts within their physiology are leading to that cardiac risk. So we're trying to identify the predictors of that marker.
Students help with the work, and this summer is no different. Junior Elizabeth Sage and Professor Green are spending the 10 weeks of the Cornell Summer Research Institute analyzing data and writing up results for scholarly journals.
This year, we just finished a 2-year trial that looked at an online prevention project for women struggling with disordered eating. We were hoping that the online program would be effective because we could really widely distribute it to the school districts and it could be accessible out in the community. Because treatment is really expensive, we were hoping to have a tool that was more widely available to women who were struggling. So we're analyzing the data from that project to see if it was effective in helping them with their symptoms.
The online tool focuses on educating women and encouraging them to share messages that fight the thin ideal.
There are a couple good findings in our data. I think the biggest takeaway is eating disorder symptoms did go down through time.
And time is exactly what these two have to make even more discoveries throughout the 10 weeks of CSRI, helping others and discovering more about themselves along the way.
I would like to go to grad school.
And so, unfortunately, again, as I said, not great videos about this. They didn't do a great job explaining what these programs actually are, but I don't know if you were able to see some of the little prompts they were showing from the intervention. One of them is like, write a letter to a younger girl about feeling good about her body, right? That's going to create cognitive dissonance because now you have to go against all your symptoms of an eating disorder, right? Or one of my favorite dissonance-based exercises that's really effective is you have the person stand in front of a mirror, and typically you have them do this at home, but you should certainly do it in therapy as well, and say all the good things about their appearance. This is really hard even for people without eating disorders. I actually did a study a couple of years ago on a very brief dissonance-based intervention where we just had people come up with one positive thing about themselves. And it was sad how many people had to just sit there and stare at the wall for like 30 seconds to a minute before they came up with something. Because our society teaches us our bodies aren't good, we're not good, right? So once you start picking away at that and you're like, no, I do like, my shoulders or, my legs are really strong, something like that. Then it starts to actually poke holes into that and create the dissonance that can be really effective. And so these are great interventions, but again, not a lot of great videos about them. I'm going to throw this one in the slides so that if you all want to watch it again, you can. And also it'll be available in the future when I teach this. And I will also just put the link on the page because Lord knows whether it'll play or not next time I pull it up. Just throw it right here. There we go. Awesome. And so, we can harness these things and use them to help people get better. And, one of the reasons why we try so hard to prevent things like eating disorders, you saw they were talking about cardiac events related to eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa in particular, but eating disorders in general, are the deadliest mental illnesses. So more people die who have anorexia nervosa than, say, depression. Because not only do you get, unfortunately, death by suicide with people with anorexia, just like depression, but sometimes they will have heart attacks, or they will, just essentially their body breaks down because they starve to death. And so it's really, really important to try to find ways to help prevent and also to intervene on people who are already engaging in these really scary behaviors, right? And perhaps the most important antidote for cognitive dissonance and the potential dangers it embodies is looking at your data really carefully. You need to have the ability to recognize and admit mistakes. That happens when you're a researcher, right? I did this giant study over the summer, collected data from 300 people, downloaded my data, and realized I included one page of a measure I didn't want to include. And I felt awful because I hated that measure, and that's why I took it out. It was really hard to answer and like exhausting, so I added to participant burden, right? And so I took that data out. And I know that next time to be double, triple sure, to double check that I have what I want in there and not what I don't want in there, right? And we need to realize we're naturally prone to attempt to resolve dissonance in a way that is favorable to us. So the ultimate correction is more light in a self-correcting process akin to science. So catching ourselves on our own dissonance. Again, me recognizing, as much as I want to believe my flashbulb memory of 9/11 is true, it is probably not 100% true, right? And that can help us make better, smarter decisions, right? So I'm not just telling you all about flashbulb memories and giving you the tale of mine. I'm telling you that there's a lot of research showing that they're probably not accurate now. So one of the things that can happen to try to just honestly survive in a society that isn't that great, right? You know, there are a lot of really great things about America. One is the democratic process, right? People got out the vote yesterday. Every seat had been up in our state legislature in Virginia. You know, and people are making really important decisions. But obviously America is by no means perfect, right? And we know that unfortunately there's a lot of systemic inequality still against marginalized people, marginalized genders, races, ethnicities, ages, abilities, right? And so sometimes what will happen in order to just like survive daily in a society that might be or might feel totally against you, right, is self-justification. And this is the act of excusing or justifying behavior that we or others see as inconsistent with our beliefs. We can deny or ignore negative or conflicting feedback as a result. And this comes out of system justification theory. And system justification theory says we have a tendency, and in fact, in a lot of cases, it is safer for us to just maintain the status quo in society, go with the flow, not rock the boat. There are truly examples throughout history, including very recent history, of people who did try to rock the boat and lost their lives because of it, right? I think about the protester at Cop City in Atlanta who was shot, what was it, 57 or 67 times, right? So rocking the boat can be potentially dangerous. So even if the status quo is not good for us personally, or even harmful for us personally, people will go along with it. And that can obviously be potentially really harmful. The biggest example of this, and where I would use system justification theory and explain it to clients when I was doing therapy, is in clients who have PTSD as a result of surviving sexual assault. And then especially the people around them, and just sort of like folks in day-to-day society who do things like blame the victim, right? And like the victim doesn't need to be blamed. Unfortunately, in the great majority of cases, the person who's been sexually assaulted blames themselves already, which is obviously not the case. It's whoever assaulted you. But the idea is, again, it's not conscious decision, but if I can put distance between myself and someone who was assaulted, if I can say it was because they put themselves in that situation, they were wearing clothes I would never wear, they were doing XYZ that I will never do, then I feel safe, right? I feel like that won't happen to me, even though it could, right? And so that's system justification theory, and just one example of how it can be harmful. And of course, the video is unavailable. Why would it be available? You know, that would be helpful. This is John Jost, who came up with system justification theory. I'll find the other video for Friday and put the link in, but he's going to explain it.
My name is John Jost, and I'm a professor of psychology and politics at New York University. And for over 20 years, I've been working on a framework which we call system justification theory, which arose out of a set of questions that I began to ask myself years ago as I attended talks and took courses not only in psychology, but in sociology and political science and philosophy and so on. And a set of questions sort of began to occur to me. Things like, why is it that some women feel that they're entitled to less pay than men? Why do people stay in abusive relationships? Why do some African American children feel that white dolls are more attractive or better than black dolls? Why do victims of injustice blame themselves sometimes, and why do other people blame victims of injustice? Why is it so difficult to get people to stand up for themselves and for others? And why is personal and social change such a painful, difficult thing? Why do we tolerate political and economic corruption and vast inequalities between the rich and poor? Is there a common denominator to all of these questions, really, is what I wanted to know, and it's still what I want to know. And the idea that began to occur to me is that it may be that people are motivated in various ways to justify and rationalize the social, economic, and political systems on which they depend. And these social systems, I think, can range in terms of size and scope from dyadic relationships and families to groups and organizations at work to even entire societies or institutions within societies. And the basic idea, it's similar to other ideas in social psychology, which is things like people are motivated to justify themselves and to maintain a positive image of themselves. People are also motivated to justify the actions of their own groups and to hold attitudes that are relatively favorable towards members of their own group, whether it's a school or a sports team or a company that they work for. We like to have positive attitudes about the groups we belong to and about ourselves. And it may be that something similar goes on at the level of social, economic, and political institutions. We also want to hold positive attitudes and to feel that the institutions on which we depend are themselves legitimate and desirable. And we can be quite defensive about this and claim that our way of doing things is superior to other people's ways of doing things, which almost surely inhibits learning from other social systems and about things that work elsewhere. And so this is...
And so I think he gave you the gist. If anyone's really interested in this theory, you can watch the whole thing later. If you have your exam 3, you can just come on up and put it in a stack on this table right here. And then folks, again, a reminder, folks who are on Zoom, make sure you drop that off at some point today. Alrighty.